This is Jed Disler, and welcome to The Piano Maven, your friendly podcast guide to piano recordings. A couple of years ago, I reviewed a new recording of the Franz Liszt Piano Sonata in B minor, played by the pianist Seongjin Cho, and it was brought out by the Deutsche Grammophon label. My first paragraph of the review read like this: Deutsche Grammophon must love Liszt's B minor sonata, having released recordings of the work by, in alphabetical order, Pierre-Laurent Aimard, Martha Argerich, Daniel Barenboim, Ander Foldis, Hélène Grimaud, Diana Casco, Yundi Lee, Ivo Pogorelich, Maurizio Pollini, Mikhail Pletnev, Daniil Trifonov, Thomas Vasari, Yuja Wang, and Christian Zimmermann. My goodness, what a great group of pianists that is. So when you consider just how many pianists have been lining up to record J.S. Bach's Goldberg variations, it got me thinking about Deutsche Grammophon, and I wondered just how many piano versions the so-called yellow label has issued of the Goldbergs, at least here in the West. There may be some versions that were exclusively issued on the Asian market, but insofar as the West, it appears that there have just been 5 piano recordings of the Goldbergs on DG to date. The first one was with Wilhelm Kempff in the late 1960s, and then nothing until the 1990s when Andrei Gavrilov recorded the Goldbergs for DG. And that one was followed closely by Rosalyn Tureck in 1998. Then another 2 decades went by until Lang Lang recorded the Goldbergs in 2019. And most recently, we've had Víkingur Ólafsson and his Goldberg variations recording on DG. Since these 5 interpretations are so utterly different from one another, I thought that it might be interesting to talk about all 5 of them. Now, they are not necessarily in my tip-top list of piano versions of the Goldbergs, but I do enjoy what I get out of them, and I'm very happy to have all 5 in my collection at my beck and call. So let's begin with Wilhelm Kempff. He plays only the repeats for the A sections of the aria and the variations, and the variations and the aria are composed in a binary form, which means that one section of 16 bars is followed by another section containing 16 bars. That's 2 parts. So Kempff repeats the first group of 16 bars for each variation. And in this recording, if you've heard it, you will notice that he plays the theme without any embellishments at first. It sounds kind of naked, but then he adds embellishments on the repeat. Kempff is a very straight-laced and intimate kind of player, and he makes his points not from virtuoso effects, but from subtle nuances, changes of color, dynamic gradations, and accents. His contrapuntal lines converse with each other, it seems, with a real naturalness and fluidity, as if the music is somewhat being improvised on the spot. Kempff generally chooses moderate tempos, but every once in a while he shows that he can really deliver fast, détaché articulation almost as well as Glenn Gould. In fact, I'd say equal to Glenn Gould, such as the Variation 27, the Canon at the Ninth. But what I really like about Kempff's Goldberg variations is the lack of artifice, and it has a real sense of authenticity in the approach. He's not out to dazzle you, but he's out to share the music. And I come back to this recording quite often with great pleasure. However, Andrei Gavrilov is all about razzle-dazzle and showing off. I once knew a pianist who described Andrei Gavrilov as a BMW without the driver. And indeed, Gavrilov's fingers often do outrun his brains. But it's so much fun to hear the speedy audacity of Gavrilov's finger work in the cross-handed variations. I even like it when he's totally glib and insensitive, as in that normally lyrical and introspective variation 13. But in other variations that are normally introspective and reserved, like the 3 minor key variations and the aria, of course, Gavrilov just kind of shuts down and becomes boring. And incidentally, he takes all of the repeats, including the rarely heard repeats in the aria da capo. Actually, they're being played more and more these days. I actually discovered that the aria and the aria da capo are identical takes. Apparently, the aria da capo was regenerated from the aria. Gavrilov simply couldn't bother to re-record the aria. Bad boy. But overall, I get a real kick out of Andrei Gavrilov, simply as a guilty pleasure. I mean, he's not the subtlest tool in the shed. He never has been, but it's a really fun Goldberg variations, as I said before. Now, if Gavrilov was a fast Goldberg variations pianist, Rosalyn Tureck took her sweet time. In fact, she always did, at least on records. In March 1998, at the age of 84, Tureck made a studio recording of the Goldbergs for Deutsche Grammophon, and she whimsically referred to it as my mature interpretation. Her tempos were never fast to begin with, but here they are quite broad, and the interpretation remains as austere and reverential as it always had been with Tureck. Rosalyn Tureck was often referred to as the high priestess of Bach, and my reaction to that line was always, well, I think the high priestess ought to get out of the temple more often. But her readings of the 9 canonic variations, the canons, have remarkable finger independence, and the minor key variations are much more flexible and even a little more spontaneous than they had been in past Tureck recordings. And all of her ornaments are very meticulously calibrated, as one would expect from a high priestess. If I had to choose one Rosalyn Tureck Goldberg Variations recording, however, I would still opt for that live version of hers from the early 1980s. It came out on both the Albany and the VAI labels, and it was recorded at a private concert at the home of William F. Buckley, of all people. So, in a nutshell, I respect Rosalyn Tureck's Goldberg Variations on DG more than I love it, or even like it, to be honest. But I am sure that Rosalyn Tureck would have totally cringed had she lived to hear Long play the Goldbergs. Now, I have to admit that I was one of the few CD reviewers in English who actually gave an unambiguously positive review for Long's Goldberg Variations recording. Yes, he is the pianist whom all serious music critics love to hate, and yes, he often can be vulgar and musically narcissistic, and he knows how to bait audiences with musical gestures and tempos and whipping up phrasing and dynamics just to get a rise out of the public. And, you know, it's probably no coincidence that Long shares a birthday with a certain former United States president, whose name I will not mention. But I do have to say that Long realizes his conception of the Goldbergs with total success and absolutely no barrier between ideation and execution. When I reviewed his Goldbergs for Gramophone magazine, I said something to the effect that if hearing Murray Pariah, Andras Schiff, or Angela Hewitt is like diving into a substantial literary work like Remembrance of Things Past, or maybe War and Peace, or Gravity's Rainbow, or Ulysses or something like that. Lang Lang's Goldbergs are like the musical equivalent of a Steven Spielberg blockbuster, meaning it's big on attention-getting effects, there's a lot of sentimentality and kind of a populist bent, yet it's technically impeccable from soup to nuts. And, frankly, what's wrong with that? Lang Lang conjures up a wide range of moods and expressive angles, and his virtuosity is brilliant, but it's not brainless in the way that Gavrilov can sometimes be. There's gorgeous legato phrasing that just oozes like melted cheese, and there are lavish ornaments on all of the repeats, and the canons feature very impressive linear separation, which is similar to Rosalyn Tureck in that sense, almost as if each line had been assigned to a different pianist playing on a different instrument. And there is a real sense of unity in how Lang Lang gauges his tempos and his transitions. Again, I think the cinematic analogy comes to mind. Now, is this how I would play the Goldberg variations, or is this my preferred kind of Bach pianism in terms of style? No, it's not, hardly at all. But again, Lang Lang totally realizes his conception, and he does so with complete conviction and, I think, sincerity. I don't get any sense of cynicism the way that I often do from, let's say, the pianist Simon Bartow's similarly affettuoso interpretations. I mean, you should hear his Goldberg variations. That's something not to be believed. He plays the Busoni edition, and it's really tawdry. But what's interesting about the Lang Lang studio recording is that Deutsche Grammophon also included another performance from a concert, so you get two Lang Lang Goldbergs for the price of one. And the interpretations are pretty similar, although I think the live version is a little more playful and spontaneous in the faster variations. But in any event, I really enjoy the Lang Lang Goldbergs for what they are, and they don't pretend to be Murray Pariah or Glenn Gould. They are their own world, and I think that's totally good and valid. So now we come to Víkingur Ólafsson, whose releases on Deutsche Grammophon are heavily promoted by that label. So many of my pianist friends and colleagues heard him play the Goldbergs in concert this past season, and just about all of them went crazy saying that this is the best Goldberg variations in the history of the universe. I wouldn't go that far, but I do enjoy a lot about his recording. You can hear the influence of Glenn Gould sometimes in Ólafsson's perky accents and his really incisive articulation. He likes to toy with the dynamics in kind of an attention-getting manner. And there are some quirky moments. For example, he drastically underplays that French overture variation number 16's opening chord, and then on the repeat he renders it as a downward arpeggio. That's kind of strange, and I don't really know if it's in the style of a French overture. And in the toccata variation, the variation number 29, he sometimes telegraphs what's going to come up to the point of shortchanging a beat here and there. And that's something Glenn Gould would never have done. Also, that difficult cross-handed variation number 5, this is one that many pianists often start at a super fast tempo, and invariably they get thicker and slower as the music progresses. And that also happens to Víkingur Ólafsson. That also happens to Lang Lang, by the way, but not Glenn Gould, nor Murray Pariah for that matter. I generally enjoy Ólafsson's impressive command of the piano in this music, and he's got charisma up the wazoo, but I still think he comes off sometimes being glib, and I don't really hear a consistency of vision or the kind of cumulative design that Lang Lang presents, even though Lang Lang's conception is less stylistically to my taste than Ólafsson's. So for consistency of conception and overall unity, I go to Glenn Gould, especially his 1981 digital remake, or Murray Pariah as well, who plays all of the repeats and has marvelous ornaments. Either of Angela Hewitt's two recorded versions for Hyperion, I think, follow this idea. Also, the first Andrei Schiff recording of the Goldbergs, the one for Decca, that is very, very special. So, there we have it. 5 Goldberg Variations recordings on the piano, and 5 utterly different piano personalities in the form of Wilhelm Kempff, Andrei Gavrilov, Rosalyn Tureck, Lang Lang, and Víkingur Ólafsson. I hope you found this talk useful or hopefully entertaining or interesting. And do check out the links that I've provided to where you can purchase and download or stream these releases. This is Jed Disler, and you've been listening to the Piano Maven podcast. I look forward to being with you next time. Take good care.